get going?
Oh, I know. You're smart.
Female microanatomy.
Yeah.
So as an overview, I did the 3 E's for male. For the female overview, I have what's called the 3 receives. You can look at the colored plate. Those are the female repro structures. And the first receive has to do with the menstrual cycle. The uterine tube must receive an ovulated oocyte. So the key term there is oocyte. That is the single cell that has the genetic material that can be passed on to the next generation. The anatomical structure it must be ovulated into is the uterine tube. An ovulation is a rupture of the ovary. So the ovary on this picture is right here. We got this one cut open on this side. And that is what must rupture. And they show the menstrual cycle occurring inside, which we'll learn in detail. We've already talked about the follicular development and the mature follicle is the graphian. It ovulates that little egg that's inside, and that little cell, the oocyte, I'll draw a little blue cell. This is the uterine tube here. And it must be ovulated somewhere around here. So pretend that little blue circle is the ovulated oocyte, which has made it into the uterine tube. And specifically, that distal portion where I put the blue dot is called the ampulla of the uterine tube. That's important to note. Because the ampulla of the uterine tube is the typical site of fertilization by sperm. Okay, so that's the first, that must happen. And that has nothing to do with the human sexual response. It depends upon the menstrual cycle, okay? And I told you it was a 28-day cycle. On what day is ovulation? 14. So if fertilization occurs, it's typically on that day, maybe day after, but right around there, okay? Day 14, fertilization. So for that to happen, the second receives is the vaginal fornix must receive the ejaculate because that has a sperm. Put sperm in parentheses. I mean, that's the cell that will fertilize the egg. So appreciate that the vaginal fornix is a structure, it's at the junction between cervix and vagina. Now the vagina is the sheath for the penis and intercourse. The fornix, J is pointing to it here. I'm going to color it in green here. It's a recess, it's a space. That's the vaginal fornix there. So I'll describe the vaginal fornix. A recess at the juncture between vagina cervix. So if you deposit sperm right there, well, you colored it green around there, appreciate that sperm must swim a little cell that is motile, must swim up through here, up through the cervix, all the way to the uterine cavity, which is connected to the uterine tube, all the way to there. So once again, it's deposited here, swim all the way to there, boom, fertilization, or conception, the miracle of life, so to speak. And I've read in books that can occur in 5 minutes after ejaculation. So imagine there's a little sperm that made it from here, and it swam all the way, and got to here for fertilization. So if that occurs, great, but you're not done yet. The third receives is that, well, that fertilization occurs, that's on day 14. Call it day 1 of conception, pregnancy. The first week of pregnancy, that fertilized egg is just undergoing its first mitotic divisions. 1 cell becomes 2, 2 cells become 4, 8, 16, 32. And all during that time, it's there in the uterine tube, just developing. So, that first week of pregnancy is days 14 to 21 for a female's menstrual cycle. And what's happening during that time is that the endometrium is thickening. Here's the endometrial lining, colored in red. Endometrium thickens into a secretory mucosa. Basically, it's getting ready for pregnancy. On the female reproductive cycle, this is something like the second couple of weeks, the day 14 to 21-ish. Now during that time, when we get into the physiology of the menstrual cycle, it's called the secretory phase of the uterine cycle. So those days of the 28-day female cycle is called the secretory phase of uterine cycle. On day 14, you ovulate the egg. On day 14, you're fertilized. The first 7 or so days, that fertilized egg is in the uterine tube. It stays there while the endometrium gets ready. Another word that is used to describe this is the progravid phase. The progravid phase, well, progravid, pro means before, gravid means pregnancy. So they also call this preceding pregnancy. Because the fertilization occurred on day 14, this is what is happening right before pregnancy. So the third receives is at around 7 to 10 days post-fertilization, the endometrium must receive a blastocyst for implantation. about 7 to 10 days post-fertilization, the endometrium must receive blastocyst for implantation. So the blastocyst is what you call the developing embryo, the baby. What will be the fetus, the baby, is in there. So this is just an overview. I mean, we can go into the details of all of this. You have a whole chapter on development. So I'm just giving you one term from the development chapter, developing embryo. At that point, you should ball cells. Okay? And implantation is a good word because if you've ever planted a plant in the ground, well, don't you have to dig a hole? Yeah? And that's what this thing does. It's able to secrete chemicals that can dissolve a hole in the endometrium. Okay, so let's say this egg is fertilized. Let's say that fertilized egg tries to get its way there and literally eat its way into the endometrium for a pregnancy. And so I'm saying that's 7 to 10 days post-fertilization. Fertilization happened on day 14. So in the female monthly cycle, what's 7 to 10 days past 14? What's 14 plus 10? Yeah, okay, so implantation is occurring. All right, and then when's the next period supposed to happen? 28, 30-ish, somewhere around there. And but if there is a baby there, what we'll learn is there are hormonal feedbacks that'll prevent menses. Okay, and then you'll miss menses, and everyone knows, you don't have to take an A&P class to know this, if you miss your period, what does that mean? Everyone knows that, right? Because baby's there. You don't want to slough off the endometrium. That is what is supporting the pregnancy. Okay, so that's kind of my overview. Are there any questions on the 3 receives? First, you gotta ovulate. Number 1. Number 2, you gotta have sperm. And number 3, it's gotta swim, fertilize, and make it back in here. Okay, a lot of stuff goes on here. Here's a sagittal section of that anatomy. And we have a lot of models of the sagittal section. And it's useful for students to look at. Here is a, like if you performed a hysterectomy, this is all the female repro structures that you can see. So we'll kind of study both views to learn the anatomy. But something you see here is the uterus, right there. There's the vagina, okay. So my first receives was ovulated oocyte muscoid uterine tube. Look on the lateral pelvic wall for uterine tube. And the ovaries should be right there on the lateral pelvis. Okay, they're closely associated with each other in the lateral pelvis, so just kind of look for it there. The second receives was the ejaculate in the fornix. So there it is right there. I always like to put a pin in the recess, right there. Okay, or the fornix, vaginal fornix, and then fertilization occurs, and the endometrium line, you can kind of see it in there. So it's pretty good. I mean, we studied the male repro the last time. The big difference is men don't have a uterus. Okay, so that wasn't there. You had urinary bladder, you had distal colon, but now we have the uterus in between there. Okay, so down here we have the labia, and here's the clitoris right there. So there's other views we can look at to appreciate some of these structures down there. I didn't quite mention them yet. There's a blank figure we can study though.
Professor?
Yeah, question?
So, yes, so you said fertilization occurs in the fornix?
No, fertilization occurs in the ampulla of the uterine tube.
Okay.
Ejaculate is deposited in the fornix.
Okay.
Yeah. So the perineal region describes the structures down here. I described the perineum last time as kind of like the bike seat that you sit on, the area between thighs and buttocks for the male, and it's the same for females too. Well, anyways, here's some coloring plates that I gave you. I can help you look in this region here. Just look at this middle part just to orient you. This is the life of an obstetrician. They just kind of spend their life evaluating things to help a woman during the pregnancy. So what you have here is a superficial view of things and then a dissected view. And what we're going to see is a lot of similarities or homologous structures between males and females. Perineum for female. Okay. Let's start with the superficial view. You have labia majora. In men, these are the testes. In female, well, let me just kind of color it. They're all this. This whole area there. There's two of them. So all guys considered labia majora. And they have hair follicles. Notice the area superior here, we call it mons pubis, this area here. Mons pubis is the skin overlying the pubic bone. So named because this is where you get pubic hair, right? Pubic hair present. On the dissected view, the labia majora no, they're not really there. But the labia minora are. The labia minora are letter F here. It's basically skin without hair follicles. So I'll just put no hair follicles. Hairless. What color is it? How about blue? So they're right in here. Maybe a majora and minora. Those are the first two things I want you to know. The perineal region. So the terms I gave you were the plural figures, because there's two of them. If you see the singular version of the word, it's labium majus, labium minus. So those are the singular terms. So the area between the labia, you see some structures. One is the, well, first of all, let me color labia minora on the dissected view here. It's right there. Okay, they kind of dissect part of it away. It's kind of interesting. But anyways, I'll try to do it on both. Now, okay, within the labia, you have the urethral orifice. External urethral orifice. I'll call that red. And you're able to see it on both structures, dissected and superficial. So they put it for the superficial view. On the dissected view, they have a little hole right there. Just inferior to that, you have the vaginal orifice. Vaginal orifice. That's the opening into the vagina. On the superficial view, it's here. Okay, it's pretty obvious over here too. I'll color that green. Vaginal orifice receives penis for intercourse. The erectile tissue in females is in the clitoris. The clitoris is right here. You can see part of it in the superficial view. That's the glans clitoris. Running out of colors, I'm going to repeat and use red for glans clitoris. Let me see if I have other colors. I'm confused on the colors. I have this pinkish color. So the glans clitoris is erectile tissue. It's right here and right here. It's homologous to the glans penis. So it's erectile tissue. Now the glans clitoris is only part of the clitoris. The clitoris has a glans, a body, and it has a bulb too, or crust. Let's see here. Yeah, and they show some of these things in there too. So head, body, and then the crus. Just like the penis had crus, so does the glans clitoris. So we did the glands. The body is shown on the dissected view. I'll use orange there. It's right here. That's the body of clitoris. Now the crus, the legs of the clitoris, you can see it on one side. It's the letter K right there. Sliver right there. This is all erectile tissue for the clitoris. They call the clitoris the female penis, although I don't think that's a very accurate comparison, because in the males, the penis conveys the urine and semen through the urethra, but not so for the clitoris. So I don't think they're very similar. But they are both erectile tissue. I'll give you that. So it's all erectile tissue. Those are the parts for the clitoris. And similar to the males, the crest of clitoris is covered with a muscle called ischiocavernosus. Covered with ischiocavernosus. So again, that's a muscle. It has the same purpose for males as it does for females. Okay, so I'll color it in where they have it. Pointing to it right there. The ischiocavernosus. And just like the male, the bulbal spongiosis in the male covered the bulb of the penis. In the female, there's erectile tissue called the vestibular bulb. The vestibular bulb. So let's nail that down, the vestibular bulb. It's L, bulb of the vestibule. Bulb of the vestibule. In the males, it was the bulb of the penis. That makes sense. They're both called bulb. Now, the term vestibule is a term used to refer to this. I think of it as the space enclosed within the labia. Vestibule. Space enclosed within labia. I'll use orange again for the bulb. So the bulb is right here. It's the letter L. and it's covered with bulbospongiosis. Bulbar vestibule, right over here, covered with bulbospongiosis. So that muscle, I'll use green to color it. It's right next. They illustrate it right next to the ischiocavenosis right here. Bulbospongiosis muscle is colored here, and on the other side. So what you got to do is you got to look for these muscles and know that they're covering these erectile tissues. Once again, ischiocavenosis covers the crest of clitoris, and then the bulbospongiosis covers the bulb of the vestibule. It's erectile tissue. Now the function of the bulb of the vestibule, there's a gland right underneath it, right here, letter N. That's the vestibular gland. It goes by different names. Let me see what they call it in the coloring book. They call it vestibular gland / duct. When the erectile tissue of clitoris and the bulb of the vestibule becomes engorged with blood, it presses the gland, forcing it to push its secretions into the vestibule for, lubrication during sex. So let me write that down.
What letter did you say it was?
M, right here. Vestibular gland, and sometimes they illustrate a duct. If it's a gland, it needs a duct to secrete into the vestibule. So I'll say that bulb of vestibule compresses this gland during sex arousal. Its secretions lubricate vestibule. They said they put the duct. I don't see where they put the duct. Oh, I see. Okay, hold on a second. Let me use black. Okay, here's the gland. Sometimes I stand really close, it's hard to see. Here's the gland. Okay, letter M. The duct they illustrate right there. A little tube structure. So there it is on one side, the gland and the duct. Here, I think they just showed the gland, letter M. So letter M is the gland. So don't confuse the bulb and the gland. So you got a lot of things going on there. You got the bulb, which is erectile tissue. You got the gland, which is a gland. And what's the muscle that covers the bulb? Bulbospongiosis. There's all stuff going on there. Let's see. Okay. I didn't color it in on this side, but what's letter F? Oh, I did color it in. I traced it blue. That's the labia. So you can see why they call it the vestibular bulb. It's the space contained within the labia. Okay, let's look at the pictures that can help you study these structures. Are there any questions on this? Yeah. Same thing. Here's a picture here. Perineal region. we looked at similar things in the coloring plates. Okay, so let's see if the coloring helps you. I'll give you a hint. This is erectile tissue. What do you think it is? Vestibular bulb. Vestibular bulb. Does that make sense based on the coloring? If that's the case, they cut away the muscle on this side, but what's this muscle that covers the bulb? Bulbospongiosis. Okay. You can see labia minora inside there. I see two orifices here. This one is the vaginal orifice, so therefore, what's this one? Just above it. Yeah, it's for the urethra. External urethral orifice is the proper name. We learned about 3 parts of the clitoris. You can see 2 of them here pretty good. Which part of the clitoris is that one? Glans, clitoris. What part of the clitoris is this? That's the crus. Remember, you have 2 legs, one here, one there. Now, what is the muscle that covers the crus? Yes, the ischiocavernosus. Okay. So, let's see here. One reason why I like the coloring is you color the whole thing. Sometimes, like these leader lines, they'll point to it, but they point to one small part of it. You know what the whole thing is. I didn't write this down on the coloring plates, but we did talk about the deep transverse perineal and the superficial transverse perineal last time. So they're here too. The UG diaphragm. You still have to know those for the female. So I'm going to write that down. I'll just write them again. We call it the UG diaphragm, a membrane for this region, and the muscle of this region, which kind of traverses the pubic arch, is the deep transverse perineal. And superficial transverse perineal muscle. Both of those muscles you're still responsible for. This is a good picture for that. Remember, the superficial one is more like a band, okay, but the deep transverse is more like the membrane part. So here's just showing you the undissected view of the external genitalia. You can see labia majora, minora, hair and hairless. You can see the orifices for the urethra and vagina, and there's glans clitoris. There's a skin over the clitoris called the prepuce. I usually don't test you on that, but it's kind of like the foreskin in males. And you have a lot of models that show this pretty accurately. For example, this one here. They use the term vulva. It's a term I don't use, but it pretty much refers, again, to the area. This picture is basically vulva. That is a term I really don't use. But I did teach you all of these things. The labia majora and minora. You see the clitoris up there. You can see the deep and superficial transverse perineal. Okay. They do show the vestibular gland. Sometimes they use the term greater. It's the same thing. There's the greater vestibular gland and the muscle that covers it. There's the ischiocavernosus. Here's a picture, that's from another college. And I used it because it was on the internet, it's easy to download. But I took this picture myself, that's my hand. And so this is a model we have in the room. I'll take out the models, and for lab today, you'll have an opportunity to study models, today and tomorrow. And so which labia is that, the majora or minora? I see 2 numbers here. So if I see 2 numbers for the labia, the more external one is going to be majora. The more internal one will be minora. Which muscle is that? There. Yeah, that's the superficial transverse perineal. Well, what do you think that one is? Number 20. That's the deep one. The interesting thing here, these are both the same muscle for the crus. That's ischiocavernosus. It's hard to see, but you can see a few fibers right there. That's the bulbospongiosis. Okay, once again, let's review. Bulbospongiosis, ischiocavernosus, superficial and deep perineal. And on this side, they do show some nerves and blood vessels there. I won't teach those now. All right, this is a different view of that same model. Here's a picture that goes along with it. If you remove all the organs from the pelvis, including the female reproductive organs, they're all supported by a pelvic floor. Okay. That's what you see there. Repro organs, sometimes it's called viscera. Viscera means contents in anatomy. Well, anyway, sometimes the reproductive viscera or organs, well, they're supported by the pelvic floor.
I'm sorry, can you say, what does viscera mean again?
Contents, yeah, the stuff. Supported by pelvic floor. You can see that the floor is muscular. Basically, the muscles of the pelvic floor are the levator ani and coccygeus. Now, levator ani has a bunch of muscles there. I won't hold you responsible for them. As a muscle group, the levator ani is the pelvic floor along with coccygeus. So that's the only thing you got to distinguish. The coccygeus is right there. And the rest of it is levator ani. There's all these sub-muscles within it, but you're not going to be responsible for pubococcygeus, ilococcygeus. You can know them if you want. If I tag one of those, just put levator ani. You'll get it right. This one, just call coccygeus, you'll get it right. That's pretty much all for muscles. I don't do all the muscles. Like, for example, that's pure form. I'm not going to ask you that. But I want to give students a sense that the bowl has a bottom. Okay? And it's mostly called the pelvic floor. And it's mostly coccygeus and levator ani. If you take a hemisection of that model, this is half of it. Here's coccygeus and here's levator ani. You can even see the anus right there. So this is a good figure to study. Even without all the viscera, you can see things down here that you're supposed to know. Okay? Like, for example, that's the glans clitoris at the very tip. But what if I tag the part behind it as the body? Okay? I'm not sure what that is. Maybe it's a blood vessel. Well, anyways, the UG diaphragm is shown here. Okay, this is all pelvic diaphragm or pelvic floor. I should use that. That's the term I also use. Pelvic floor, or another way to name it, pelvic diaphragm. Not to be confused with UG diaphragm. So that is a common point of confusion in anatomy. Pelvic diaphragm. The muscles are levator ani coccygeus. But what we're saying for the UG diaphragm, deep and superficial transverse perineal. So keep that straight. It's all shown here. So what I'm pointing to here, all this, is this pelvic diaphragm or UG? All this, what do you think? The bottom of the bowl. Pelvic diaphragm. UG diaphragm is in front of it. It's right here. I can't read that. I think it's 31. But anyways, it's all right there. Now here's the thing. For things to exit the perineal region, you have to pierce the UG diaphragm. So this is a female model. I see the vagina and the urethra. They both pierce, go through the UG diaphragm. vagina, urethra, both go through I'm not going to have you identify anus, that's digestion, but you have the labia here as well. Okay, so even with all the visceral organs gone, you can still identify those muscles, and you can still identify the perineal structures. All right, so I want to move on from the perineal region and talk about the internal organs a little more. There's a labels on if you want to study it, labels off, labels on, using the PowerPoint slides. I want to talk about the ovaries now. Now the ovaries can be seen in this picture. This is the superior view, so let's orient ourselves. Superior view. You got the colon in back, posteriorly. You got the urinary bladder in front, so that's the pubic symphysis. Okay. Cartilaginous joint. In the middle, uterus. Okay. Ovaries, lateral pelvic wall right there and there. And you can see the close association with uterine tube, ovary, and there's a ligament that supports the ovary. So basically, ovaries. Now there's a lot of pictures you can study to orient yourself to what the ovary looks like. In this picture here, it's a common one I see in most books. So what they're doing is, if you remove all the organs there, uterus, ovaries, uterine tube, there's vagina. And if you cut right there and look at it from the side, this is the picture you see. And it's meant to teach students the broad ligament. And also you can see the relationship between uterine tube here cut and ovary here cut. Okay? And notice how they're both, well, let me just, it's drawn well for you. These are the three parts of what are called the broad ligament. The broad ligament kind of supports all of these structures in the pelvis. So you got to cut uterine tube here. Okay. I use the term uterine tube as much as I use the term oviduct. They're both commonly used, so get used to hearing both. Ovary down here. The ovary has got the developing follicles and eggs, that's important. And they're both important because the uterine tube receives the ovulation every month. And the supportive structures are the broad ligament. The broad ligament has three parts, as I say on the slide. Uterus and ovaries are suspended by mesovarium, mesometrium, and mesosalpinx. So mesosalpinx, mesovarium, mesometrium, consider those the three parts of the broad ligament. Mesosalpinx, mesovarium, mesometrium. So imagine if you took a peritoneal membrane and you just covered the whole thing. In this case, the uterine tube, where it's going to meet and gather right there. So you have a double membrane right there. And right below the uterine tube, they call that mesosalpinx. Just right here, just like the figure. Salpinx is a word that means trumpet or bugle. If you look at the uterine tube, I mean, it looks like a big long horn you could blow through, I guess. Anyways, that's where the term mesosalpinx comes from. It's kind of like the tissue that supports the uterine tube right underneath it. Now there's a part that diverges off here and covers the ovary. So the part right below uterine tube, mesosalpinx, the part right above ovary, well, I can draw it quite a bit, this part here. Call that mesovarium. And the part, or the rest of it, the rest of the broad ligament from there on down is called the mesometrium. It supports the uterus, which you can't even draw here. So on the coloring plate, on this one, they do, you can color it in here. Okay, so let me undo that. I'm going to erase my previous stuff. Don't worry with that. Of those three parts, what's the biggest part? Mesometrium is. On this figure, I would just kind of like, well, they label it here, mesometrium, broad ligament. So mesometrium. I'm going to trace the outline here. You got ligaments and blood vessels within there too. I'll just kind of go all the way up to there. All this area here is a sheet covering and supporting mesometrium. It provides lateral support mostly for the uterus. They cut it away here. They cut away the part that's attached to the pelvis and the side. Okay. Now it's harder to see mesosalpinx and mesovarium, but they point to mesosalpinx, and they just point to there. But I'm going to color in all this area right underneath it green. Right where it pinches underneath. Remember, it's a double membrane. And where it pinches right underneath the uterine tube, that's where I would put the sticker for mesosalpinx. And where it pinches right above the ovary, that's what I would call mesovarium. So I get mesosalpinx in green. I go mesovarium in blue. So you have to pay close attention to it. It's like right there. Now, not all models show all three parts of the broad ligament. Okay, so, but at least if it does show, you kind of know how to look for it. This is probably the best model we have. It's on the shelf over there. Well, I took a picture of it, and it shows all three parts of this ligament, the broad ligament. I mean, does this make sense that that's mesometrium? That part is mesovarium, and that part is mesosalpinx. And the three-dimensional model, you can kind of see that it's not a straight sheet. It kind of bends with the structures there. So that's a good model to study that has all three parts of the broad ligament. Okay, if you look at the uterus itself, this coloring plate teaches students how the peritoneum covers the uterus, but it makes all these pockets. So these pockets are not in the male list because men don't have a uterus. But with the uterus there, in between the bladder and the rectum anus, you have to know it. So what I'm going to write here is that the peritoneum covers the uterus and other organs and creates pockets. Or pouches. Anyways, let me just kind of like trace the peritoneum. The peritoneum starts here. It goes all the way down there, all the way down there, folds over the uterus right there, goes behind the uterus, goes all the way there, folds back up, and follows the colon there. So what I trace with the blue line is membrane. It's peritoneum. It's a serous membrane. But the pockets it creates, like for example, you got one here. This little pocket right there. That's called the vesicouterine pouch. The term is right there. I color it green. You can always remember which pouch it is if you remember that vesico refers to the bladder. And notice, this is the normal position of the uterus. It's like right on top of the bladder. It's flexed over the bladder, creating vesicouterine pouch. The uterus is normally, they call it anteflexed over the urinary bladder. Creating this pouch. Now the pouch behind it okay, that's the rectouterine pouch. It's the pouch between uterus rectum. Now I always ask one of these on the lab practical, and students have a tough time with this one. This one, the most common mistake is you mix them up. And I think that's kind of a silly mistake if you can just remember what the rectum is. If you know that's the rectum, you know which pouch that's going to be. And this is the vesicouterine pouch, the one in front. All right, so anyways, I do want you to know those pouches in front and behind the uterus. Well, here's a color figure from the atlas that kind of shows the same thing. I used a blue line, I used a red line, just to kind of emphasize the spaces in front and behind of the uterus. Okay. Here's the picture we looked at before. If you were to remove all of the organs, you get this picture there. And this is the picture That's the color picture we'll study. So what you're doing is, you're taking the whole uterus, and in the frontal plane, you're cutting it open. So that way you can see the layers of the uterine wall as well as the uterine cavity. So this is uncut, this is cut open. Now in this picture here, they didn't cut the whole thing open, they kind of quartered it. So here it's uncut, but here it's cut open, so you can kind of see the internal structures. And this is a good picture to use to kind of study the regions of the uterus. The superior top round part is referred to as the fundus of the uterus, labeled A. I'll color green. I'm just going to color where they, on the outside of the, I'm not going to color the whole thing. So, right in there. The superior round part is the fundus. Now, most of the uterus is referred to as the body, and that's true in any anatomical structure. The body is the main part of something. It's labeled B. The body of the uterus, color blue, from there to there. The inferior part, about an inferior third, more or less, is the cervix, the neck of the uterus. Now the cervix is the part that must dilate to let baby's head through during delivery. Here's the letter C there. There's just this, all this bottom part there. You know, there's another region that's commonly used, and this is a good picture to teach it. Do you see how at the cervix it kind of constricts a little bit? The constricture has a name, and that's called the isthmus. It's hard to say, isthmus of the uterus. So let me put a lasso around it. This part, or it's the narrowest, right around there, is referred to as the isthmus. I'll add it to here. Isthmus of uterus. Now, just look for the narrowest point where the uterus constricts. Now that's what I'm writing, where the uterus constricts. So one thing I said about the cervix, I didn't write it on the board, perhaps I should have. The cervix must dilate. So there's a canal going through the cervix. The canal will allow sperm in to fertilize the egg in the oviduct, but it'll allow baby's head to pop out of it. It's part of the birth canal. Okay, so the cervical canal is important to note. And it's bounded by internal os, external os. Allows baby's head to emerge. It's got to dilate to 10 centimeters. But it also, during sex, allows sperm in. Okay, so, see if I can draw here. Right here, I'll just kind of draw a red squiggly space. Stop. Pretty much where I put the red squiggly line is the cervical canal. It's bounded by an internal os and external os. Os, O-S, simple word to spell, means opening, like an orifice. So the internal os I want to put a little green dot where it is, pretty much right here. I put it by design at the same level as the isthmus, because that's by definition where it is. Okay? So that's how you get into the uterine cavity. So right below it, right at the opening where sperm first swims in, is the external os. Right down there. All right, so those are the regions of the uterus. We may come back to this. Let's look at the picture. From the atlas that you should be studying at home. So uterine fundus, this top round part, most of it is the body. Pretty much from here on down is cervix. And they label the cervical canal. Okay, it's more obvious in this picture. And so the top of it is internal os and the bottom of it is external os. And notice they put in parentheses at uterine isthmus. So by definition, the internal os is kind of like at the same level as the constricture of the isthmus is. All right? So you deposit sperm there, that's the vaginal fornix. Right? They say vaginal fornix, lateral part. You can just call it fornix, you're going to get it right. Sperm must swim through external os, cervical canal, internal os, uterine cavity, all the way up here. And if an ovulated egg is waiting there, fertilization may occur. All right. The other things that we can learn from this picture are the layers of the uterine wall. Now, I already mentioned the endometrium. I did not mention the myometrium yet. In fact, that's most of what the uterus is. It's a big muscle to help push baby out. So imagine a baby's developing gestation for 40 weeks, and it's like the wall is getting stretched out really thin, and oxytocin can reinforce contractions to help push baby out at full term. layers of uterine wall, endometrium. So I colored it in before on a picture like this. I think it was the same picture. I colored it in red, I believe. I just colored it in again. I mean, it's this red part. It's all the way up there. It's the inner lining, and the endometrium is important because it's responsive to the sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So basically, those hormones target the endometrium. Basically, the endometrium thickens to get ready for pregnancy. And, well, if there's no pregnancy, you have menses. Okay, but this is the hormone, the sex hormone responsive layer. The muscle part is the myometrium. Smooth muscle. That's the one in the last lecture I said oxytocin targets this. Responsive to oxytocin during labor and delivery. So the myometrium, I'll use orange. I mean, it's all of this, it's labeled E. It's this whole layer here. It's a big muscle layer. You can color it solid if you want, and I can take the time to do that. It's the thickest part. Okay, it's the muscle part that helps expel baby. You can also color it in here. You can also color it in on the other side where they sectioned it out. So endometrium and myometrium, and the outer covering is the perimetrium, which I already talked about. The perimetrium is basically the part of the broad ligament. It's the part that it's going to like just cover over the uterus. So it's the outermost lining that is peritoneum. So perimetrium is peritoneum. And it doesn't cover the whole uterus. Like part of the cervix is not covered by it. It would pretty much be, I think I erased it, but it's this outer layer here that covers it. Okay, on this side it is just the outermost layer. But literally it's peritoneum. So perimetrium, that's kind of why they give it that name. So know the three layers: endometrium, myometrium, perimetrium. They don't show the perimetrium in this photograph. That's okay. I want to look at some histology pictures of the uterine wall. We'll do that when we come back from break. Take a 15-minute break. Come back at about 9:35.